Hey everyone, this is Dr. Jimenez and welcome to the HyFlex Classroom Primer. The goal of this primer is to introduce you to the concept of the HyFlex Classroom, what it's about, and how it relates to our current situation that we find ourselves in 2020. So let's just jump right in. More importantly, you're going to be reading about the HyFlex Classroom and course development this week in week 10. So this is a good opportunity just to get at least a little brief understanding of what HyFlex is all about. First and foremost, HyFlex is short for hybrid flexible. So it's a hybrid course, but happens to offer a flexible series of components to it. Specifically, HyFlex includes both instructional approaches that are both in person as well as online. So face-to-face plus online learning. But it's not just online learning. It's online learning both synchronous and asynchronous. So it's not either or, it's you have in-person, synchronous online, asynchronous online together in some form or fashion. Now, the idea of HyFlex, though, is that it is student-directed, and it's meant to be a multimodal learning experience. So the idea behind HyFlex is that students can decide for each class or given activity how they want to participate. Do they want to be in person? Do they want to be synchronous? Do they want to be asynchronous? So student choice plays a big role in at least the concept of what makes a HyFlex course HyFlex, because you're offering these different modalities, right? Different modalities that the students can choose to attend. Now, that might be different from what you're experiencing today in your respective classrooms, because obviously, thanks to COVID and many of the restrictions that we have in place for our safety, students may not necessarily have a choice, but the concept behind HyFlex and what it offers could serve as a good foundation for how we proceed, not just during this pandemic, but in any future crisis or situation going forward to support student learning. A couple of things to note here. I'm just going to move my camera for a moment so you can see the entire slide in its entirety. When it comes to the benefits of HyFlex, although this slide primarily focuses on student benefits, which is where I want to focus our attention to, keep in mind that it's also a benefit to the instructor as well, which we'll come back to in a moment. But if you consider the student benefits, first and foremost, the fact that HyFlex provides students with autonomy, flexibility, and seamless engagement, because it doesn't matter, what's going on. They can attend an activity, or they can be involved in an activity or in the course synchronously, asynchronously, or in person. So the idea here, again, goes back to the concept of student choice. The central idea of this model is that all modes of learning are equivalent. And this is an important distinction. It doesn't matter. It's not that one's better or the other. Because you're giving students choice, students, therefore, are given the opportunity to attend through the mode that they prefer, and therefore each mode is equivalent and is just as valid. So this is a very key distinction between hybrid versus HyFlex. Big difference. The other thing also is that from an approach, the idea here is that the flexibility approach here is extended to both student and faculty. So for example, the faculty member or the instructor could also choose to attend the mode which works best for them. So they don't have to necessarily be in the classroom. Again, conceptually, that's what HyFlex is about. But again, this is different from what we're experiencing, obviously, because I know for many of you, I know that you're being asked to return to school, that you're being asked in many cases to be on campus in your school facilities teaching these sessions, right? So just something to keep in the back of your mind as we go through what HyFlex is all about. And finally, ultimately, the goal here really is that you want to give students the choice. Now, the choice to attend remotely in person. So you still have a physical classroom, you still have a scheduled time, but students, again, make the choice. It's all about the flexible component of hybrid environment. Why is that important? Because when you start to look at the overall modes of learning, and this is just my extrapolation of everything that I've experienced over time, and in my looking to simplify this for the purposes of our discussion today. If you look at the bottom of the pyramid, you have your traditional classroom, which again, your traditional modality of teaching is your standard brick and mortar classroom, which we're all used to. Obviously, we know what online is. Now, there are certain pieces of literature that make a distinction between online versus remote, although there are some that may use the terms interchangeably. There are those who will say that online specifically refers to the asynchronous classroom. So the idea is that there's always an asynchronous component when you're talking about online, and that if you're dealing with a synchronous classroom environment, you're dealing with what's being called remote learning. I actually experienced this myself in my other teaching job, where I teach a remote class of freshman seminar students for a New York college, and those students are specifically told, you are not taking online classes, you're taking remote classes. So just understand there is a distinction, but in some of the literature you might see online and remote just collapsed in for the purposes of simplicity. Having said that, the other element is hybrid. Now, hybrid and HyFlex sometimes get lumped together because in many ways you probably are doing hybrid training and teaching right now. Whereas in a hybrid situation, you have people that are in person as well as learners who are both online or could be remote. So in many ways, what many of us are dealing with today is hybrid learning. But what the literature is suggesting, and the literature that we're going to read this week points out, is that there's another level, and that is HyFlex, which again, in its most simplest form, it's hybrid learning, but including that element of student flexibility and student choice. And what you're going to learn about this week is how could that concept be applied to the respective classrooms, which I think is an interesting idea and consideration, especially because we don't know how long this pandemic will last. We don't know how long the after effects of the pandemic will last. So considering a HyFlex mode of learning might be an option, or at least elements of it could be an interesting approach for us to consider in our future teaching and learning with our students. So if you think of it from the most basic form of modalities, which is traditional, all the way to the more online, more complex, HyFlex is definitely a concept that we need to become familiar with, especially now with all the challenges that we're finding in the 21st century that we may not have considered before. HyFlex by itself, by the way, is not a new concept, but it's gained popularity in recent months for obvious reasons, because now people are looking to the future and they're asking, how can we make sure that students, when the pandemic subsides, or even as the pandemic continues, how do we get our students to continue learning and learning successfully? And HyFlex is being looked at as a potential model for us to consider. With that, that brings us to the end of our primer. Hopefully this was informative. Again, you're going to read more about the HyFlex courses or HyFlex learning environments and modalities in your readings this week for week 10. If you have any questions, email me, let me know. And I look forward to seeing you all on the discussion boards. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.